Hello, my name is Steve Taylor, and I'm the project manager for BTE. I'll be giving a short overview of the information contained in the Community Open House number 1. This video has been prepared to supplement the information we provided for the web-based Community Open House for the Highway 7 and 12 environmental assessment. The purpose of the project is to determine the appropriate long-range provincial highway transportation plan that will be compatible and supportive of the land use plan that's being developed for the town of Whitby. This study is required to meet the requirements of the Environmental Assessment Act. And at the end of the process, if you're not satisfied with the recommendations of the study, there's an opportunity for members of the public to request the Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks to consider a Part 2 order. Further information will be available when the Transportation Environmental Study Report or TESR is available at the end of the study. At this point in the process, we're holding this initial community open house to provide an opportunity for the public and stakeholders to comment on the proposed approach, alternatives, and overall scope of the study before any decisions are made. This meeting would typically have been held in person, but to safeguard staff and members of the public during the COVID-19 emergency, we're using an online community engagement process. The first step in the EA has been to prepare a draft study design report. This document describes the problem to be addressed by the EA, the alternatives to be considered, and the steps in the decision-making process. This draft report describes the blueprint for undertaking the overall study. The study design report will be updated and revised as we receive comments. The main purpose of this initial community open house is to present the draft study design report and receive comments on this document. The full draft study design report is available online for more detailed review than is contained in the Community Open House number 1 exhibits. The study design will ultimately be finalized following the Community Open House and the receipt of public comments. This figure shows this overall study area in which alternatives will be evaluated. Within the study area, the town of Whitby is forecasting large increases in population and employment, and this is reflected in the Ontario Places to Grow plan. The population is forecast to reach 56,000 persons by 2031 and 80,000 at build-out. This growth cannot be accommodated by the existing routing of Highway 7 and 12 through downtown Brooklin. The municipal objective is to have Baldwin Street reflect the heritage character of the historical downtown area, which requires the removal of high volumes of through traffic and heavy truck traffic associated with the provincial highway. The objective of this EA is to determine the feasibility of removing provincial traffic from Baldwin Street and to determine the preferred location of a future provincial highway network. The MTO's Class EA process requires a 2-step evaluation of alternatives. The initial step is to consider if there is another broader type of planning solution or alternative to the undertaking. These types of solutions, which are described in the draft study design report, reflect approaches such as limiting growth, doing nothing, or a new location for the provincial highways. The preliminary recommendation in the draft study design report is that the most appropriate planning solution is to relocate Highway 7 and 12 from the existing corridor on Baldwin Street. We are seeking any comments you may have regarding this recommendation at this phase of the study. The second step will involve the evaluation of preliminary design alternatives. These are formally described as alternative methods of implementing the undertaking in NTO's Class EA. The draft study design report, which describes the highway alternatives that will be considered in the study, should the public support the preliminary design recommendation that a new location should be selected for Highways 12 and 7. The draft study design report illustrates a long list of potential corridors for Highways 7 and 12. This initial list of alternatives is open to public comment. In total, the draft study design report identified 42 alternatives which involve various combinations of the corridors. Based on initial comments received, 2 new corridors have been suggested by the public to be considered, in addition to a corridor initially considered by the study team along Thornton Road in the city of Oshawa. One of the 2 new corridors suggested was the use of Brock Road in Pickering, and the second was a corridor using Lake Ridge Road and Region Road 21, known locally as Goodwood Road, within the Township of Scugog. The two new alternatives and the Thornton Road alternative are not within the Town of Whitby. The team has assessed these external alternatives, those external to the Town of Whitby, and have a preliminary technical recommendation that they should not be carried forward. These alternatives are beyond the Whitby municipal boundary, and as such, the corridors cannot be designated, their property can't be expropriated, and the routes have longer lengths and higher costs and higher environmental impacts. Their preliminary recommendation is not to carry forward any alternative outside the Town of Whitby. This recommendation is presented at the community open house for public review and comment. The draft study design describes several stages of the EA. The initial stage will document the need for the project and development of the draft study design report for public review. Following community open house number 1, we will review all comments received and then finalize the study design report. This will eventually be posted online when available. Following the finalization of the study design, the next step will be the review and assessment of the long list of corridors using broad-based environmental inventories of the natural, social, and cultural environments to establish constraints along each of these corridors. Comments have already been received that there are significant issues along some of these corridors, and the next stage of the study will document these disadvantages to allow for the comparison of these alternative corridors. Alternatives with significantly greater impacts than other alternatives carried forward may be course-screened from further consideration, and this will be presented at Community Open House number 2 in the fall of 2020. Following the analysis and evaluation of the corridors, a preferred corridor will be selected. This will be presented at Community Open House number 3 in 2021. Within the preferred corridor, there will be highway alignments which will be developed in greater detail. We expect there will be refinement alternatives considered that may include variations of alignments, intersections, and the connection of the terminus of Baldwin Street and Dixon Road after it is no longer designated as a provincial highway. During this stage, we'll be completing detailed environmental inventories, focusing on site-specific issues and constraints. The final stage of the study will conclude with a selection of our overall recommended highway plan. This plan will be shown at the final community open house and will document mitigation measures for any residual effects of the project. The consultation program will engage stakeholders throughout the study process, allowing involvement at each point of the decision-making process. This will provide the Indigenous peoples, public agencies, and individual property owners an opportunity for involvement. At this initial community open house, you can provide comments on the process, alternatives, and initial scope. There are other environmental assessments ongoing in the town, and each of these has different timelines and objectives. Should you have questions on other studies, we will direct your comments to the respective project teams. In closing, the online information available to date does not have all the answers on what the future plan will be. However, it does present a framework that we can follow for the decision-making process that will lead to the best balanced solution for a long-range provincial highway plan. We appreciate members of the public who have taken the time to review the information, and should you be interested in being contacted for future meetings, we request that you provide us your contact information and comments. In closing, I remind viewers that more detailed information is available for review on the project website, including a PDF of the Community Open House number 1 exhibits.